I'm not going to preach this morning. I'm going to share from my heart. Is that okay? Proverbs 16, verse 9. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. How many of you have ever thought that you had your life figured out, and it went nothing like you thought it was going to go? How many of you, when you got married, you thought you knew exactly how that was going to go? Turned nothing like you thought it was going to go. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about my personal testimony. Some of you have heard parts of it. And isn't it true that hindsight is always clearer than foresight? Right? And there have been so many twists and turns in my life that when it was happening, I had no clue what was going on. I mean, I've had the carpet ripped out from underneath me numerous times. And there were times when I was so confused and hurt because hope deferred makes the heart sick. And when you think something's supposed to happen a certain way and it didn't go that way, how many of you can testify that's pretty much a good story of your life, right? Right? Well, this is my story. So I was born at a very young age. You can relate? Yeah. So I was born to a very strong Catholic family. At least my mom was strong. She was head of catechism, which would be equivalent of our old Sunday school. My dad was raised in a very stern, hellfire, brimstone Baptist church, and so he was hurt and wounded deeply as a child. And thank God he's in heaven today. Yay, Jesus. But so when they got married, the only way he'd get married to her is to become Catholic in the Catholic Church. And so he was Catholic by name, but my mom was very strong. I went to catechism for all 12 years of my childhood. I was an altar boy for 10 years. I have an uncle who was a priest and two nuns that was a priest, two aunts who were nuns. I often joke that it's a miracle I even got here with that many in the ministry in the Catholic Church. And whenever I was born, as young as I can ever remember, I loved the Lord. And some of you will understand this, others of you will scratch your head. I loved the Lord for 16 years before I even knew who he was. I just always had a heart for God. My passion for Jesus is something that he put in my heart as a child. And so I did everything that I possibly could to try to love the Lord in my limited understanding. And that came through, in all honesty, rules and regulations. And let's not condemn the Catholic Church for that, because Pentecostal churches do that too. But I always thought it was about rules and regulations, and if you did all the right things, God would be pleased with you, and then you could spend eternity with heaven. And the truth of the matter is, as a child, I wanted to be a priest, which made my whole family excited. There was going to be another priest in the Catholic faith. And so I remember my great-grandmother, the last conversation I had with her, we called her Mimi, and she lived in Missouri, we lived in Florida. And I remember the last conversation I had with her because the brother and two sisters who were priests and nuns, she was the only one that didn't go into the priesthood or the ministry in the Catholic faith. And so Mimi kind of felt like subpar to them. And so she was super proud of the fact that her great-grandson was going to be a priest. And I remember the last time I talked to her, I was in 6th grade, and I had made a new discovery in 6th grade called girls, which kind of messes up your plans for priesthood. And I remember my last conversation with Mimi. She came right up, and by the way, we knew this was going to be the last conversation. Her health was declining tremendously. We knew this was going to be the last conversation. And in that conversation, she came out and she said, Ricky, they called me Ricky as a child. She said, Ricky, are you still going to be a priest? And even though I knew that I was not going to be a priest, I did not have the courage to tell her the truth. And because I didn't want to break her heart. And I said, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. So she died thinking I was going to be a priest. Well, I have become a priest. Amen. But so fast forward now to 16. I'm 16 years old. And I had a crush on this girl named Joyce. And the only way her parents would let me take her out on a date was to go to church with them. They went to a small Assembly of God church. And so I would be an altar boy on Sunday morning, and then at night I would go to this small Assembly of God church that was about 20, 25 people on a Sunday night anyway. And I did that so that I could take Joyce out. And so in my memory, I thought I got it saved right away. But I had talked to the family years later, and we were rehearsing those days, and I made reference to the fact that, yeah, I accepted Christ right away. And they all looked at me like, no, you didn't. It took you dated Joyce for like 6 months before you accepted Christ. And looking back at it, I realized what it was. It wasn't until that night that it clicked inside of me that I was a sinner and that Jesus died on the cross so that he could forgive me so that we could have a relationship. It was that night that it clicked. And the night that it clicked, my love for God just instantly said yes. And I remember there wasn't 25 people in there, and I was sitting exactly where Andrew Ingram's sitting at in proximity. I was in that third row. And the preacher, he lied to me. He at the end of the service, he just bold-faced lie. He said, if you want to ask God to forgive you, raise your hand. I won't embarrass you. Yeah, you know where I'm going, right? So I raised my hand. He goes, young man, I see that hand. And I'm thinking, of course you see my hand. There's only 20 of us here. I'm sitting in the third row. I remember thinking this. And he said, if you want to accept Jesus, I want you to come forward right now and ask God to forgive you. And I was thinking, you said you weren't going to embarrass me, but it's okay. And I got up, a Catholic boy who had a heart for God, and I knelt down and stood up a son of God. I was completely changed. I was transformed at that moment. I became something I had not been before. I had become a young man who literally had God living inside of him. And the revelation that I could have a relationship with Jesus hit me that day, and ever since then, I've walked with the Lord in an intimate relationship with God. I will be honest with you, okay? I do believe you can backslide. I do believe that you can walk away from the Lord. However, I can't relate to that. I do not understand how anybody could experience what I did on that day and walk away from it. I just don't understand it. I know it happens, but I just don't understand the backslider. 16 years old, I'm now in the summer between my junior and my senior high school year, and instantly, I'm talking instantly, well, 2 weeks later, this is a fun story. 2 weeks later, I'm there in that small Assembly of God church. It was Holt Assembly. And they were praying for people to be baptized in the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Now, I'm 2 weeks old in my walk with the Lord. And some of you have heard this story. I thought I was John Travolta, okay? I had a natural fro. I literally that night was wearing the tall platform shoes. I had the pink shirt, slick, pink silk shirt on, a white suit, okay? That was me, 16 years old, 2 weeks in the Lord. And they're calling for us to be baptized in the Holy Spirit. And so I don't know what I'm asking for, but I come up there anyway. Now listen, guys, this is the honest goodness truth. I am not acrobatic at all, okay? I mean, this is that is my cartwheel right there. That was pretty good, wasn't it? That's my cartwheel. I am not acrobatic at all. The Lord is my witness. I'm standing right here in proximity at the altar, platform shoes, white suit on. I wish. I don't have a picture. I literally don't have a picture. But you have to just, the image enough should scare you. But anyway, I'm standing right here in my platform shoes. They pray for me to get filled with the baptism of the Holy Spirit. I literally jumped and did a backward flip and landed on my feet speaking in tongues. Literally. It was the real deal. Nobody taught me to say Yamaha, Hyundai 15 times real fast. It was the real deal. And instantly, I wanted to be a preacher. Instantly, I wanted to be a pastor. It was always in me to be a pastor. I will tell you, you are looking at a man of God this morning. I love the Lord, and this is a call of God on my life. However, I'm in a dilemma now. I'm part of a very strong Catholic church, Catholic family. I've got a call of God upon my life. And so, in all of my life, my dad drilled in me to get good grades. I was one of the first Criscos to graduate from high school. And he had drilled in me to make good grades because he wanted me to get a good job to make a lot of money. And here I am, a preacher. But anyway, that's okay. And I remember it was a couple of years later. I'll fast forward just a little bit. It was a couple of years later. It was January 18th, 1982 at 2 o'clock in the morning when I received my official call from God to step into the ministry. Now, up until then, I had been for 3 years wanting to go in the ministry, but I was afraid because back then there was a lot of preachers that were saying stuff like, don't be self-called. We have too many self-called people in the preaching the gospel, being in the pastorate. And they would even say stuff like this, woe is me if I preach not the gospel. It was like, I felt guilty for wanting to be in the ministry. They actually made me feel guilty for it. Like, you shouldn't want to do this. This is a heavy burden to carry. You shouldn't want this. And so for 3 years, I kept just putting it off. And I got my AA degree in accounting, and I was working on my bachelor's degree in accounting. I was going to, dear God, thank you for delivering me from accounting. Sorry, the Catholics there, dude, I can't help it. But on January 18th, 1982 at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had gotten home from night school. I was working at the hospital at the time, going to night school, getting my AA degree in accounting. 2 o'clock in the morning, just finished my homework. I sat down in a little red beanbag chair, and the power of God came over me, and he said, I called you to the ministry. I remember that next day or two, we were sitting down at dinner, and Back then, I could eat half a chicken all by myself, and like a lot of teenage boys. And I couldn't eat a thing. I just couldn't eat. And my dad, he said, "What's going on, boy?" He might have said son, but it was pretty firm. And I said, "Well, Dad," I said, "I'm not going back to university next semester." And he said, "Oh, you're not?" I said, "No, sir." I said, "God's called me into the ministry and I'm going to seminary." And they said, well, actually, he said, he didn't even bat an eye. He said, "We know." And I went, "What do you mean you know?" And he said, "Well, I've never told you this, but when you were born, your great uncle, who was a priest, literally held you in his hands, lifted you up and said, and prophesied that you were going to be in the priesthood." I said, "Why in the world did anybody not tell me that?" I mean, I'm agonizing over this. Why in the world did not anybody tell me that? And my dad, in his wisdom, even though he didn't know the Lord, in his wisdom, he said this. He said, "Because if you went into the ministry, I wanted you to know it from God, not from other people." Well, after that, it was confirmed numerous times, not that I needed it, but it was confirmed numerous times. And so, go back to that night, after he said that, Mom and Dad said, "Well, if you'll be a priest, we will support you through school. We'll pay for it. If you go this other way, they didn't even know what to say, the Assembly of God way, if you go this other way, you're on your own." I said, "Well, I'm on my own." And I worked my way all the way through college. I had worked my way through college up to that point even, but whatever. And I said, I'm on my own. And just so you can understand a little bit of who I am, the day that I left for Bible college was the very first time I can recall my dad ever telling me he loved me. It was something I begged for and tried to earn all my life. But I was driving out of the driveway, pulling out, going to Bible college, when I heard the front spring door open up, and my dad hollered, "I love you, son." I pulled out of the driveway around the corner where nobody would see me, pulled off the side of the road, and wept. I go to Bible college, Southeastern Bible College. I transferred. I lost a year. I transferred in as a first semester sophomore. I did 3 years of college in 2 years, averaged over 21 semesters while I'm working at night and doing 4 or 5 ministries at the same time. That's when Jane and I met. That's a fun story, but that's not part of this story here. We met and on the front row of the chapel, and we developed our relationship literally in the library and in ministry trips. And one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. Now it's time for graduation from Southeastern. And I think it's important that you know this as well. I was so focused on preparing for ministry. I love Jesus, and I just want to make him known to people. I want people to know the Jesus I know. Because if you could know the Jesus I know, you could never walk away. You could never walk away. I was serious about ministry. And even though I was only 21 years old, all of my classmates thought I was 35. True. Ask any of them that went to school with me. They thought I was 35 because I never played intramural sports. I never did any of the social. I didn't go there to socialize. I went there to prepare for ministry. And so I was doing ministry, I was working, I was studying. My typical day would be I would get up every morning at 5:30 in the morning. I would go to the chapel for an hour. I would then go and have breakfast. I had a 10-meal-a-week plan because that was the cheapest plan that you could find. And they required that you had a meal plan in order to go to school there. And so the smallest meal plan they had was 10 meals. So I literally ate 2 meals a day, Monday through Friday, and fasted on weekends. That was my ministerial training. That's the reason why I believe avidly in fasting and prayer. And and I was so serious that all my classmates thought I was 35 years old. And I'll never forget the day that I graduated. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Because afterwards, whenever everybody's throwing their tassels and they're all hugging one another and crying, I was crying too, but I was in the corner crying because I had nobody to say goodbye to. But I didn't go there to make friends. I'm not saying that it was right. I know that I'm out of balance, but I'm just telling you the truth. I was crying because I had nobody to say goodbye to. Meanwhile, my pastor at home at Milton First Assembly knew how awesome I was. And so he actually sat his youth pastor down at the time, who was a great guy, Dwight Johnson, great guy, great young guy. And he said, Dwight, he said, you are ready to pastor, and it's time for you to go. You're ready to pastor, it's time for you to go. And he literally told him it was time to go. And by the way, it was good for him, but partly because he was wanting to hire me. And even though I had 3 or 4 churches that offered me a position, and my church offered me the least pay out of all of them, I knew my pastor, Pastor Rogers, who's still alive today. He pastored that church for 50 or 60 years, that church. Man of God, and I trusted him. And that's where I went for my very first assignment as a youth pastor. And I went there. There was 25, 30 young people in a church of 200 on Sunday morning. In over 8.5 years, that youth ministry grew from 25 to 30 to 140 young people averaged in a church of 200 on Sunday morning. I just want you to just follow with me, okay? And you can see this in your own life. So I'd been there for 8.5 years, and all of a sudden, the anointing and the grace to pastor those young people lifted. But I'd never been in transition before. I'd never been in transition, so I didn't know what was going on. And I sat down with my pastor, and I said, Pastor, I said, I think God's calling me away. And I remember him saying, Richard, he said, I would hate for that to be true. But if God's calling you away, I will not hold you back. And so I thought I had a good-looking resume. I had been at one place for 8.5 years. Youth ministry went from 25, 30 to 140 in a church of 200. I'm thinking, dude, I'm a hot commodity, right? I literally sent out a resume throughout every district in the Southeast United States. I had no dream of ever living in Michigan, folks, okay? Just want you to know that. I sent out my resume in every district. Not one phone call for 6 months. Nobody called me. In my young mind, I probably was about my late 20s, 28, somewhere 30. I interpreted no phone call as God was through with me, that my ministry was over. And for the first time in my life, I actually contemplated suicide. Because if God was through with me, I didn't even want to live. I'm just being straight with you. But obviously I didn't do it. So I continue open conversation with Pastor Rogers all this time. And we're doing great. Here's the irony. During that 6 months, youth ministry continued to flow. It was amazing. It was awesome. So meantime, one more little piece of the puzzle that I think would be good for you to know. During that 8.5 years that I was with Pastor Rogers, who is the greatest pastor I've ever met in my life. The man is a real pastor. That's where I get my heart for pastoring. People want to put other titles on me. You're an apostle, you're a prophet, you're this, that, and the other. Listen, I don't care about any of those titles. I just want to love people and love Jesus. That's all I want. I don't need a title. But, Jesus, where was I going? But during the 8.5 years that I was his youth pastor, I was the only other person on staff. And even though he was an amazing pastor, he was a horrible administrator. Oh my God, terrible. I'm a young guy, I've got leadership skills, and so I began to say to him, Pastor, let me do this for you. Let me oversee Sunday school. Let me oversee the men's ministry. Let me oversee this thing. Let me do this. And he loved me for it. Absolutely. Yeah, please, you do it so much better than I do anyway. And so I'm doing this. I still have my calendar. I can prove to you. The last 3 months that I was at Milton First Assembly, I did not have one night off. Not one. Because I was doing so many things. In fact, I was probably doing 85% ministry outside of youth ministry and 15% among young people. It was pulling me out of my call. Meantime, I have another Assembly of God pastor at my literally back door. My property backed up to the back of his property. And he is married to the treasurer of Brownsville Assembly. In Brownsville Assembly, a big church in Pensacola, in my mind, okay, because it was run in 1700. I was in a church of 200. And they were looking for a youth pastor. And he would come to my house almost every night. Hey, Richard. Yeah, Steve. Brownsville's looking for a youth pastor. I think you'd be great there. I go, nah. I got my resume out. I'm sure they found it. Pensacola's too big for me. I don't think that I want to do that. Richard, have you called Brownsville yet? Nope. Richard, they're expecting your phone call. Rich, I'm telling you, no exaggeration, every day for over a month. Finally I said, Steve, listen, give me the man's number. Pastor Kilpatrick, by the way. I said, give me his number, I'll call him. He gives me his number. I call his house. His son answers the phone. Now, his son is probably like 13. His son answers the phone. I said, hey, this is Richard Crisco. I said, is your dad there? And he goes, no, he's not there. I said, listen, would you please give him a message for me that I called? He goes, sure. He hangs up. What's a teenager going to do? He forgets. Steve comes by the next day. Richard, I said, listen, I called. I left a message. Richard, he didn't get the message. I'm like, Steve, listen, if the man wants to talk to me, he can talk to me. Finally, I call again. I remember the phone call like it was yesterday. He picks it up, and I say, Pastor Kilpatrick, this is Richard Crisco. He goes, oh, Richard, nice to talk to you. I said, Pastor Kilpatrick, I want to be real honest. I hate Pensacola, and I want to leave this district, but I'm calling you anyway. He said, okay, let's meet at Red Lobster. So that week we met at Red Lobster, and we were talking, And I knew that I knew that I knew that I was going to go to Brownsville, and I was not happy. I was not happy. And in my second interview with him, I brought Jane. He asked for Jane to be there, and he offered me the job. And he actually was one who had saved my marriage because Jane and I was going through a very difficult time at that time. And it was largely because of the pressure that ministry puts upon pastors' wives, that they have to perform certain duties. And Jane was doing that. She was doing the things that she was supposed to do. She was leading the women's Bible study, the women's ministry of the church. She was, up there working with the teenagers, and she was doing all of that, but she was dying inside because it's not who she is. In fact, I did not know until after I became your pastor that my wife had a horrible teenage experience and was petrified by teenagers, and here she was married to me. Interesting dynamic. But Pastor Kilpatrick, that day when he offered me the job, I remember him sticking his finger, and he did this a lot. He stuck his finger across the table at my wife, and he said, "I want to make one thing clear, young lady. I'm hiring him, not you. You do whatever you want or don't want to do." He saved my marriage. And that's the reason why to this day, you can attend this church for a year, and unless you have a child in the nursery, you'll never know who my wife is. And it's not because my wife and I have a bad, strained relationship. It's just that she loves babies. And so she's the head of the nursery, and she hates to be in the spotlight. She hates to have a microphone in her hand. She hates to have to teach, even though she's one of the best teachers I've ever heard, and that's a true statement. But, and when I came here, I made it clear to the board that you're hiring me, not my wife. And she's not going to play the same role as the previous pastor did. And I commend your board for giving my wife that freedom. So now I find myself at Brownsville. I was not happy. I was not planning on being there. That was not my plan. And I'd been there for about 2.5 years, somewhere around there. And many of you know of the historical revival that fell during that period of time, Father's Day 1995. That's a whole story I could take a week to talk about. I'm not going to do that. I'll just simply say, I will go to my grave not knowing why God would let me be a part of a historical move of God like that. I will never understand it. It's the grace of God. That's all I can say. It's not because I'm anybody special. I sure don't have the giftings and the callings. But I will tell you, I saw supernatural things that very few people ever get to see in a lifetime. I saw my youth ministry go from 145 to literally over 1,000 teenagers in 1 year. And the only reason it didn't get bigger than that was because the room only held 1,000. I literally saw every high school turned upside down for Jesus in 1 year. I'm talking major move of God. Hundreds of teenagers gathering on campuses all across the area for intercessory prayer and Bible study. It was a sovereign move of the Spirit. And God's hand was on my life to disciple those teenagers. Let me just give you one more. I just love telling this part of the story. I can't remember which year it was, 1998 or 1999. I literally had 100 high school students graduate from high school. 100 seniors that year, literally. Okay, I exaggerated, I'm sorry. 99. There were 99. I was thinking, I couldn't have one more. It was 99. 99 high school students graduate from high school that year. 75 of the 99 went into full-time ministry. Now, listen, that was not me. You understand that? That's a sovereign move of the Spirit. And that's the reason why I have a lot of spiritual sons and daughters who are in full-time ministry today, both here and abroad, missionaries. And I count it an awesome privilege that I do not deserve. Now, we move forward to the year 2000. There's the horrible split that takes place between Dr. Brown, who is the head of the Bible College, and Pastor Kilpatrick, who's the head of the church. There's a difference in theology, there's a difference in philosophy. I'll just leave it at that. As a result, there was a split in the school. I will tell you, my number one gift in life is the gift of restoration. I love restoring people in their walk with God, in their walk with their spouses, and to get back on their feet. It's who I am. One of my greatest gifts, and it's a gift from God, is grace and mercy. I just believe in people even when they have no reason for me to believe in them. It also is one of my greatest weaknesses, because the enemy will use your strength as a weakness if you're not careful. And it's so many times I will be slow to lower the boom when I should lower it, because I just love people and I want to give them space to repent and get back on their feet. Pastor Kilpatrick understood this gift in my life. Now, remember, he took me out to lunch, and he said, Richard, he said, I want you to be the interim president of the Bible College. I need you to bring healing to those students. Will you be my interim president of the Bible College? And I said, yeah, Pastor, I'll do that. And so for 2.5 years, I was the interim president of a Bible college of 500 to 600 students who were deeply wounded and confused, pastoring over 1,000 young people, preaching at conferences every weekend, recruiting for the school and ministering. I literally was preaching 9 times a week. I don't even remember those years. I just know that they existed. 2.5 years go by. Pastor Kilpatrick, in his search, continuously comes to a dead end and cannot find somebody to take over the school. He takes me out to lunch again. He says, Richard, I need you to take over the school permanently. I said, Pastor, that's not my plan. In his heart, a man makes a plan for his course, but the Lord determines his steps. I said, Pastor, that's not my plan. He said, what do you mean? I said, Pastor, do you even understand what you're asking me to do? He goes, I think so. I said, no. You need to know what you're asking me to do. I said, you're not only asking me to give up my young people that I have poured my heart and soul into for 12 years, but you are literally asking me to give up my entire identity. Because listen, I don't talk about this because it doesn't need to be talked about, but this is truth. At that period of time, I could not walk through an airport without somebody stopping me and asking me for my autograph. That's the truth. And everybody who knew who I was knew me as youth pastor of the Brownsville Assembly of God, Move of God. That was my identity. Not only that, but I tell Connor this all the time. Connor Saunders has the best job in this church. It's the truth. I wanted to be a youth pastor my entire life. I did not want to be a lead pastor. I did not want to deal with knotheads adults. who are set in concrete and think they know it all. I'm sorry. I love young people who are teachable and pliable and finding out who they are and helping them find out who they are in Jesus and their giftings and callings. I love that. Now I get to bury people. Stinks. By the way, this is in honor of Carol Peoples. I said, Pastor, you're asking me to give up my young people. You're asking me to give up my identity. The man didn't even blink. Yep. I said, okay, Pastor. Wasn't my plan. But if that's what you say, I'll do it. And I gave up my young people, and I became the pastor of the permanent president of the Bible College for another 2 years. Now, 2003 comes. It's at the end of the 2003. I'm miserable because I love dirt. I love crying with people. I love helping people work through their marital problems. I love, as sick as it sounds, I love holding people's hands when they're burying their loved ones. I love helping families work out through their differences. I love the dirt. I love the dirt of ministry, only because I'm called to it. And Bible college is an artificial bubble. It's not reality. Because if you step out of line one little bit, your hand gets slapped or you get expelled. And that is not kingdom. I'm sorry. But that's the way it was. And I got sick and tired of an artificial bubble. I was sick and tired of being a talking head. And I wanted to be involved in the dirt of ministry again. And so I literally started the year 2004 with a 40-day water fast. And because I loved Brownsville so much, my life was transformed there. I loved the young people. I loved the students there. I loved that. It's scary how much I love that church. I might have been committing spiritual adultery. I might have loved Jesus' bride more than him at that time. I love that church. And so I needed a word from God. I had already been hurt once there because I need to back up just a little bit. Right after Pastor Kilpatrick asked me to become the president of the Bible College, he resigns. He just gets up on Pastor Appreciation Day. I'm on the road with 30 Bible college students doing a conference and recruiting. This is Pastor Appreciation Day. He's sitting up on the platform. He calls his wife up to him. He goes, Brenda, I'm about to resign. She sits down. He walks up to the pulpit and resigns and walks out the door. But that's John Kilpatrick. That's how come he can pastor a move of God, because he just goes, okay, that's what we're doing. I get a phone call on the road, pastor just resigned. I'm like, what in the world? Because part of the story I didn't tell you is I tried to resign 2 times before he resigned. And he refused to accept my resignation. And I'm like, you rascal. At that moment, I wasn't a real Pastor Kilpatrick fan at that moment. And listen, I'm not slandering him. I'm not slandering the man. The man is a man of God that I hope to be half a man of God. But this is just the way it was. I come home, you talking about head spinning. And he had just brought back on staff Randy Felshaw, who I also have deeper love and respect for. and with the intention of, he had been his associate before, with the intention of turning the church over to him in a couple of years. But he had only been there for a couple of months. And so Pastor Kilpatrick pulls the carpet out, walks out the door, and now Randy Felshaw and I are standing looking at each other. The church knows that Pastor Kilpatrick brought Randy Felshaw in to take his place. They know what's going on. But the church loves me. And I remember Randy and I having phone calls at night, and we said, we're not going to split this church. I said, absolutely, we're not going to split this church. And so I never let my name run. I never let my name be run. As a result, many people begin to leave the church. And they begin to call the district. And the district calls me. And they said, Richard, there are hundreds of people in Pensacola who want to start a new church. And they're asking us to appoint you as their pastor. I said, thank you very much. I said, you know you called me, and I know you called me. But everybody out there is going to say I split the church, and I will not do that. I will not pastor a church in Pensacola. Back to 2004. I'm in the middle of this fast, and I have a student come up to me before my Romans class. He's visibly shaking, and he said, Pastor, he said, could we please pray for my home church? They just dismissed 5 pastors because of moral failure. As I'm praying for this church, I went, oh my Lord, I know this church. I've been there twice speaking at conferences. And one of my spiritual daughters, Sarah Morris, is the youth pastor there. I ran to the phone and I called Sarah and I said, Sarah, I said, what in the world is going on? I said, we just prayed for you guys. It just so happened that I was going to be preaching a youth conference at Brightmoor up the road here the next week. And so I said, Sarah, I said, listen, I'm going to be in the area. Why don't you come spend some time with me? And let me see if I can help you. Let me just see if I can give some counsel and help. I don't have a dog in the fight. So now, in all honesty, I'm probably around day 28 of my fast. Only my wife knows I'm fasting. Well, they probably all figured I was fasting, but they didn't know what I was fasting about. And I sit down with Sarah, and I'd been ministering to her for about an hour. Again, she doesn't know what's going on in my life either. And she said, Brother Richard, she called me Brother Richard too back then. She said, Brother Richard, she said, I don't know what's going on. But in the last 48 hours, I've had 4 different people call me. 2 of them were our deacons, and 2 of them were our intercessors. And all 4 of them had the same dream. I said, really? She goes, yeah. She said, they all dreamt that you were our next pastor. I knew at that moment, this is where I was coming. I put on the best poker face. I put on the best poker face you have ever seen in your life. She had no clue. I never told her after that. I get home from that trip. I go to my next class to teach. I have a Bible college student come up to me. She says, Brother Richard, I had a dream about you last night. I'm telling you, this is crazy. Let me read it again, folks. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. She says, Brother Richard, I had a dream about you. I said, really? She said, yeah, I dreamt that I went to a conference and you was one of the speakers. I thought, okay, whatever. I did a lot of that back then. She goes, but when they introduced you, they did not introduce you as Richard Crisco. I said, really? She goes, no. She said, they introduced you as Rochester Crisco. Pastor Kilpatrick calls me up within a couple of days. He and I have not talked for over a year. He calls me up. He says, Ricardo. That's what he called me when he was in a good mood. Ricardo. I said, hey, Pastor. He said, have you heard about what's happened up in Rochester? I said, well, actually, I have. He said, I could see you there. Click. Try working for that man. Typical John Kilpatrick. So when I came up here, and the board will testify to this, when I came up here with my family to try out for this church, I didn't even have my return flight till a week later because I knew I had to get my kids enrolled in school. That's how sure I was. And I remember I preached that Sunday morning a message entitled, "The Sheep Will Know Their Shepherd's Voice." Did I ever dream of moving to Michigan? No. I didn't even know how to spell Michigan. I didn't even know it had a UP. I'm sorry, my geography's terrible, friend. I'm telling you. But I knew that God had called me here. And my life has had so many twists and turns that at the time I had no clue what was going on. Had no clue. But I can look back at it later. I want to give you one more. This blows my brain. Randy Felshaw took over the church, and I moved here. And again, the Lord knows I am not exaggerating. When I came here, some of you know some of the things I had to deal with. And there were some afternoons that I would literally leave the church office at 2 or 3 o'clock, go home, curl up underneath the blankets in my bed in a fetal position, cry myself to sleep until the next morning. That's how intense it was. And I never, ever shared that with anybody at that time. It was intense. I was giving my heart and soul to this church to bring health, wholeness, and restoration all day long. But what you didn't know is I was walking the floors all night long, crying out for Brownsville to be healed. I felt like I was carrying twins in my womb. I'd been here for 2 years. Randy Felshaw resigns. He is a hero of the faith, by the way. Randy Felshaw is a hero of the faith. John Kilpatrick's a hero of the faith. Dr. Horton, who's the pastor now at Brownsville, is a hero of the faith. They're all powerful heroes of the faith. After 2 years, though, he took all of the blunts that needed to be taken in order to get things back where it would be survivable. As a result, it took its wear and tear on Randy. This is my perspective. He resigns. He's doing it great now in Texas. Thriving church in Texas. Wonderful man of God. He resigns. Immediately, my phone starts ringing. Richard, Randy just resigned. It's time for you to come home. I said, nope, you're not on the board. The board has my number. You put your resume in. Nope, I'm not putting my resume in. The board has my number. They can call me just like you did. They never called me. I'm in anguish. I'm going to show you how God directs my footsteps. I end up in Pensacola. I don't even know why I'm there because this is a Sunday morning, so I wasn't there preaching. But I was in Pensacola on a Sunday morning, and I wanted so badly just to be in the building. And so the attendance had diminished so much that they now closed the balcony. It had a balcony. And I knew that it was closed, that nobody was allowed up there. And so that morning, that Sunday morning, I got there real early, like at 8 o'clock, when the first usher came to open the door. they were so excited to see me. I said, listen, I said, thank you. I said, I'd like to be able to stay today, but I can only stay if you will promise me one thing. He said, what's that? I said, will you let me go lay in the floor in the balcony? I just want to be here. I just want to be here. This is where my life was changed. Will you let me? I know nobody's allowed in the balcony. Would you let me in the balcony and lay in the floor? And will you please not tell anybody that I'm here? He said, Brother Richard, I'll do that for you. I said, thank you. I'm in the balcony of the church. At the end of the service, the elders get up and they line up all across the platform. And they said, church, we have a very exciting announcement to make. Now remember, I'm like, am I supposed to be here? Am I supposed to be at Brownsville? I'm carrying twins. All this is going on. I'm in the floor of the church, and the board gets up and they said, we have a very exciting announcement to make. We have found our next pastor. His name's Dr. Horton. He's going to be here next Sunday, and you will have an opportunity to vote. And I won't tell you the verbiage that they use, but you give you an opportunity to vote. And they used verbiage that was inappropriate, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. And when they said that, they had no clue I was up in the balcony. When they said that, there was a spiritual scissors that literally cut the umbilical cord to that church. And ever since then, I've been completely free from the burden of that congregation. That's God. You cannot make that stuff up. Are you hearing me? So, I am here by divine appointment because God directed my footsteps here. And I have one of the most painful announcements to make. And I want you to listen to me carefully because I have written it out exactly like I want to say it. And I don't want you to read anything into it that's not there. And you need to determine whether or not you trust me or not. And if you don't, it's okay. It's okay. I understand. But you've got to determine whether you trust me or not. Here's my statement. As a leader, sometimes you are called to make difficult and painful decisions. And recently I've had to make one of those decisions. Sarah Morris and her family have been a tremendous blessing to our church family for over 23 years. Over the years, she has served in many roles. Initially, Sarah was our junior high pastor and then served as our youth pastor for more than a decade. When she had her second child, we both realized it would be a challenge for her to balance being a great mom and serving as a full-time youth pastor. That's when I made one of the best decisions I've ever made as your pastor. I asked Sarah to step into a part-time role as pastor of college and career ministry. She accepted and led a powerful ministry in that area for many years. A few years ago, Sarah shared with me that the grace had lifted to lead the college and career ministry, and she was ready for a new challenge. At that time, I offered her the role of executive pastor of our young families and teaching pastor. She graciously accepted, and for the past few years, Sarah has done an excellent job overseeing the children, youth, young adults, and young families. However, after much prayer and reflection, I believe Sarah's season in that position has come to a close. She is now ready for the next chapter of ministry that God has for her. And as a result, this past Monday, I initiated a conversation with Pastor Sarah and requested for her resignation from her role as executive pastor. I want to make something very clear. There has been no moral failure or sinful behavior involved in this decision. Once again, there is nothing to hide. Sarah and Ben do not yet know where their next assignment will be, but they have submitted to my decision with grace. Our board of elders have agreed to honor Sarah's long service and have offered her a severance package of 5 months full pay and insurance during this transitional period. I also want to emphasize that the Morris family is deeply loved and appreciated, and they will always be welcome to worship with us. Whether or not they decide to stay here is a matter for them to pray about, but I will always hope that the Lord may lead them to remain part of our family. As we navigate through this transition, I ask that you please refrain from talking and gossiping. Gossip is one of the enemy's greatest tools to divide and destroy the unity of the church. Instead, I plead with you for you to pray for both the Morris family and for our church leadership as we move forward. I love you. I believe God has great plans for both the Morris family and for our RCC family in the near future. Amen.